The dirt road that almost took my life. Context: I grew up my entire childhood without a father. When I turned 15 years old, I got really into hunting and just enjoyed guns in general. My uncle is an avid hunter, gun builder, and ammunition reloader. He loves to hunt. This was a common interest that made us become very, very close. He was my father figure and taught me a lot that made me the man I am today. Now to the story. My uncle's father lives in Montana, which allows us to get residence pricing on big game hunting tags. Once a year, we would head up to his property and hunt for a week. Usually this would go off without a hitch, and if we were lucky, we would get the shot we were looking for. Unfortunately, not this year. Just like every year, we headed out to his father's property in northern Montana. That night, we headed out to go set up some hunting cameras so that we knew that there were deer in the area, so we knew it was a good place to hunt. It must have been 1 a.m. and we were driving down this 2-lane dirt road, headed into the woods. We were always the only people on the road, since it was so early in the morning. This particular time, we saw headlights approaching us from behind, but thought nothing of it. We figured they must have been doing the same thing as us. After tailing us for some time, the headlights disappeared, which was strange, since there were no turns on this particular road. A few seconds go by, and all of a sudden, we see a truck driving on the shoulder to our right, with the lights off. The shoulder was a small hill with brush, and a fence fairly close to it. Definitely something that nobody should be driving on. The truck speeds up, and gets back on the road, turns its lights back on, and speeds off into the darkness. This sets off some red flags, but we figured they were just impatient and wanted to get there before us, no big deal, or so we thought. We drove down the road for a few more miles, until we saw a taillight stopped in the middle of the road. It was the truck that passed us a few miles back. They had set up traffic cones to completely block the road off, and there was another truck parked on the shoulder. We figured that they must have broken down, so we stopped. I had read an article online earlier this year about people in other countries that would make roadblocks to rob and kill people for their vehicles and belongings. I laughed and started to tell my uncle about this article when 2 men from each truck jumped out of their vehicles and started to approach ours. My uncle always kept 2 handguns on shoulder holsters under his arms when we were out doing these kinds of things. This saved our lives. 2 of the men stayed at the tailgate of the truck parked on the road, and the other 2 men came up to his window. At this point, my uncle has his right hand in his jacket, with his hand holding the gun. The men were extremely friendly and said that the truck on the shoulder had broken down, and they were just helping him out. They asked if my uncle knows anything about cars, and if he can take a look at the problem. My uncle refused, and this made the men angry. Both instantly drew pistols, and one of the men routed the front of the truck towards my window. My uncle grabs a man's gun that was pointed at him, which he forgot to load a round into, luckily for us. My uncle pulled his gun out and shot the man in the shoulder and slammed on the gas, driving on the left shoulder past all of the men. I looked back and could see the other 3 men gathering around the man my uncle shot. We drove and drove and drove for what seemed like an eternity without saying a word to each other. We drove back to his dad's house, and he told me to go to bed. He called the police and told them what had happened. They sent out 2 officers to the house to take his statement. I mentioned to him that they had quite a few reports of roadblocks being set up all around northern Montana. They were able to catch all 4 of the men who stopped us that night when they took the man who was shot to the hospital. Pretty sure I was almost carjacked. I was on my way to an event in a town I'd never been to. It's a smaller town, and I had almost no cell reception, so my GPS was cutting in and out. I ended up taking a wrong turn that led me down a one-way dirt road. It honestly felt like it went on forever, but in reality was only about 5 miles long. I took the first turn I saw to turn myself around to make it back to the main road. This took me in what looked like the remains of a small trailer park. There was abandoned trailers, houses that were caved in, and houses half burned down. I was not in a hurry to check things out. I rounded the corner to turn around, stopped behind a car at a stop sign. The house next to the stop sign had two men sitting on the porch, but I didn't want to make eye contact or talk to them in any way, shape, or form. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw one of them stand up and make his way towards my car. At this point, I moved up to the stop sign and was about to accelerate when I see him begin to run and reach for the handle of my passenger side door. I slammed on the gas as he put his hand on the door. I peeled out of there without looking back, so for the guy who either tried to carjack me, kidnap me, or just scare me, please, let's not meet. Trailer Trashers. This wasn't my scariest encounter, but many years later it still creeps me out and angers me. In my early 20s, I was married to an asshole and had a little girl. He moved us out to a tiny, depressing trailer community, about a half-hour out of Carson City, Nevada, called Stagecoach, the kind of hot, brown, dirty, dry desert area where you'd expect to have a rickety sign proclaiming the number of inhabitants living there, and as soon as someone died, an old prospector-type man would come out to scratch out the number and write the new number of residences. Anyways, we moved into a shitty single-wide trailer that didn't have a phone line. We only had one car, which he was always taking either to work or go party with his friends on the weekend, leaving me alone with our daughter. If I needed to make a phone call, I'd have to walk a mile down the dusty dirt road to the nearest payphone. This was way before cell phones. Sometimes he wouldn't even let me have change for the phone. Once he found a $5 bill I'd been keeping in a drawer and he flipped out on me. See how many abusive red flags you can find in this post. It's no surprise that I was depressed as hell. So, about midnight one weekend, when he was off in California, somewhere with his drug buddies hooking up with underage girls, I woke up to the sounds of someone trying to get in the back door. There was a shed attached to the back door that was full of crap that belonged to the landlord, and we didn't even have the keys to get into the shed or go out the back door. With my heart in my throat, I tiptoed down the hallway and just stood outside the door, listening to the footsteps of what sounded like more than just one person in the gravel outside, and the metallic scrapes and bangs of someone trying to force their way in with a metal tool, maybe a crowbar. Well, each trailer in this community sat on at least half an acre, so my closest neighbors were some distance away, but their dogs started going nuts. The sounds of an attempted break-in stopped. I didn't hear any footsteps leaving the property, but they could have been masked by the dogs barking. I tiptoed into the kitchen and grabbed a sharp knife, praying they couldn't see my shadow through the thin curtain, or that my footsteps wouldn't make the cheap plywood floor creak, or that my daughter wouldn't wake up and start crying. I sat on the couch holding the knife for the rest of the night, ears hypersensitive to every single sound, silently crying, and wondering, why'd I let my life get to this point? When my husband got back the next day, I told him about the incident, and he laughed about it, said it was probably the teenagers from the next house over, except if it was those kids, the dogs wouldn't have spooked them off. And I still wouldn't have been much of a match against a group of teens if they'd managed to get inside. Nothing ever came of it. I never found out who it was, and nobody tried breaking in again. But my in-laws sure thought it was weird when, a few weeks later, they drove over without him to offer me a ride into town because they said their son had decided to move in with some girl in California, fully expecting me to break down crying, but instead, I burst out laughing. His leaving was an answer to my prayers and an escape from that hellhole. The dirt road. So you know how this goes. Long-time reader, first-time poster. My name is James. I am 20 years old, and this happened to me when I was 18. But before I start, I have to tell you some background. I used to go to a college in New Hampshire. I am in no way an intimidating person by stature, and most of my friends aren't either, considering a lot of them are girls. Just keep that in mind. So, one night, I was sitting in my dorm room working on some homework that I needed to for class the next day. About an hour and a half into doing homework, I get a call from one of my friends named Michaela. She asked if I wanted to smoke a blunt. I happily obliged. I'm not one to usually turn down free smoke-ups. About 15 minutes went by, and Michaela called and said she was outside my dorm. I grabbed my coat and keys and left. I had a weird feeling when I left, because I usually travel with my knife, especially when I was in New Hampshire. There was a lot of sketchy meth heads in my college's town, but I shook the feeling off and started thinking how blazed I was going to be. At this point, I was a sophomore. Most of my friends didn't have apartments or houses, and we couldn't smoke on campus, so we used to go on a copious amount of L rides. Every L ride I've ever been on has been normal, and nothing out of the ordinary has ever happened until this night. The route we usually took was a winding back road that creeps up a mountain, with a thick layer of trees on either side, where there weren't houses. The road was very secluded and was all residential, so there was not much traffic. On our usual rides, we would drive up the road and over towards a dam that was about halfway up the mountain. But this ride we wanted to explore, so we drove up towards a dam but made a turn down a side road. This side road was eerie and quite creepy, and the fact that we went at night just made it all the more terrifying. There was no street lights, and I see no lights on houses. This is when I started to get that bad feeling in my gut. As we were driving down the road, I kept looking behind us to see if anyone was following us, because I had a strange feeling that someone was watching us. After about 5 minutes of driving on the paved road, it suddenly turns to a dirt road. I immediately say we should turn back, and proceed to say that the car we were in wasn't appropriate for this road. Everyone else in the car disagreed with me, and we pressed on. We drove down the road for another 10 minutes or so, and I started feeling a little less anxious and paranoid, probably because of the weed we were smoking. My friend Kelsey was in the car as well, and she was just about to hand me the blunt when I started to see headlights coming towards us. I started to getting that uneasy feeling again, but this time it was much more convincing. The hair on the back of my neck started to stand up, and my blood ran cold. As I hit the blunt, I watched the car coming closer and closer. No one else but me thought this was weird, and what happened next made me thankful for reading so much encounter stories on here. The car was about 50 feet from us now, and it started to slow down. I could see that it was an old model Ford, probably made in the late 80s. It was disgustingly dirty, covered in mud, grime, and rust. The closer the truck got to us, the more nervous I get. The truck gets about 10 feet from us and just stops in the middle of the road, blocking us. The fact that we were on a dirt road made this much worse. There was no curb or sidewalk to drive on, and no shoulder for us to pull off to. The truck just sits in front of us for about 2 minutes, and then a tall, bearded man gets out. He looks disgusting. His clothes were covered in dirt, and what looks like blood. He's just standing there staring at us with a terrifyingly toothy grin, and I noticed that he had something in his right hand. I couldn't see what it was because his car door blocked the view, but I'm pretty sure it was a knife. I started telling my friend, who's driving, to get the fuck out of there. I've read too many stories on here to become a victim of this bullshit. At this point, I was the only calm one in the car and thought about all my options. I see that there is a little clearing on our right that the car can squeeze through. I tell my friend to do it. She throws it in reverse and guns it to the right. All the while, the man just stares and smiles. Then, as we pass, he makes a gun with his hands and pretends to shoot the car, then proceeds to laugh a horribly terrifying laugh. We were flying down this dirt road, trying to get away from this man, but as we turned down a side road that would take us back to the main one, I realized the truck was following us. I told my friend to drive towards campus. We were only about 15 or so minutes from it. The truck followed us all the way back to campus, and at one point came right up next to us at a red light, and the man made the same gun with his hand and laughed the same laugh as before. I rolled down my window and called him a psycho and told him I called the cops if he didn't stop. The next thing he said chilled me to the core. Right before the light turned green, he said, "It's okay, James. The police don't know where I live or who I am." My fucking mouth dropped. How the fuck did he know my name? When I got dropped off, I looked to see if the truck was still around, and I couldn't see it. I wish the story ended there. But unfortunately, there's one more terrifying part. A couple days after that incident, I woke up to go to my 10 a.m. class. Usually, the first thing I do when I wake up is open my blinds and look outside to see what the world has in store for me that day. As I looked outside, I could see the truck parked in the parking down the street from my dorm. I knew it was the same one because it had the same big rust spot on the hood. At first, I wasn't nervous about this. I was on campus with 5,000 other people. There was no way you could do anything to him on campus during the day. So I forgot about it, got dressed, and headed off to class. As I was heading out of my dorm, a friend of mine who was walking in the dorm said someone paid her $5 to give me a letter. She said that a man told her I needed urgently and to bring it to my room. I reluctantly took the note, said thanks, and walked on to class. I opened the note. When I got to class, it read, "Hello, James, remember me? Of course you do. You invaded my personal space by coming on that road. I don't take kindly to that. I must return the favor. See you soon. G." I walked out of class instantly, went right the parking lot, looking for the truck, but it was gone. This note made me quite uneasy over the next few weeks. I went out less and less, and eventually wouldn't leave my dorm room except for classes. I found out to tell my parents about 6 weeks after the note incident, but since then nothing happened. I figured it was over and the man forgot about me, so I told my parents everything was back to normal. Until one morning. Usually my friend Kelsey would wake me up around 9, and we would get breakfast, but this morning I was awoke by someone tossing something at my window. I looked at my phone before I looked at the window and saw that it was 5 in the fucking morning. What asshole was throwing shit at my window at 5 in the morning? Sure enough, I looked out, and the man was standing there with that grin. My heart sank. I opened the window and said, "What the fuck are you doing here?" He replied, "I'm here for you. Your time has come." "What the fuck are you talking about, you moron?" I said. He didn't like this response. He stared at me with a hungry look and he said, "You're coming with me. Whether it be today, tomorrow, or a week from now, it's your turn, James." I was more angry than I was scared at this point. I just wanted this asshole to leave me alone, so I said, "Okay, I'm calling the police now. You better leave." He stared with a blank look in his eyes and said, "Don't press your luck, boy. Next time I see you walking from a party alone, I won't be as friendly." I stood there in shock as I watched this man walk down the street and disappear. I remember that one of the first weeks I got to school, I was walking home drunk and alone from a party, as I often do, and a car pulled up next to me and asked if I needed a ride or any directions. I politely said no thank you, and the driver obliged. They finally hit me. The man that asked if I needed a ride was the same man that was just outside my window. I got chills throughout my spine. That man had probably stalked me and watched my every move from that point on. I believe if I had taken that ride offer, I would have never been seen again after figuring this. I told my parents the next day, and they pulled me out of school. I live back in my hometown now. I still get nervous that the man will come find me down here, but I'm coping with it and trying to get over it. The only thing that still haunts me relentlessly is how I had no idea that this man had been watching me for so long. It makes my skin crawl just thinking about it. Moral of the story, if you're going to go on an L ride, stick to roads you know. And especially don't turn on any dirt roads in the middle of nowhere. You never know what could be lurking out there, just waiting for you to pass by. Dirt road follower. Let me preface this story by adding that this is my first post on Reddit, after lurking for quite some time. I found this subreddit the other day, and I couldn't pass up sharing my own experience anywho. This happened during winter break of my freshman year of college, so only a few years ago. My girlfriend at the time and I were hanging out with a few friends, and we ended up just driving around our town, which is notorious for its fair share of creepy roadways. Bored out of our minds and looking for a good scare, we decided to check out one of these alleged haunted roads, which was located a ways up a pretty secluded street and through the woods. This haunted road was actually a dirt road, which connected two other streets, and right beside the haunted road was an abandoned summer camp located next to a lake. A typical horror movie setup, I know. We slowed down to make the turn onto the road in question when we see another vehicle pulling up. It stopped for a moment, and we passed it to continue on. It was then that this car made an immediate U-turn and began to follow us. I was in the back seat, and I glanced back at the strange car. The headlight definitely didn't look like a Crown Vic or any other type of emergency vehicle, which was the first red flag. The second red flag was when they pulled up very close to our bumper and tailgated us all the way down this creepy dirt road. We were driving pretty slow because the road was uneven, and it would be unwise to go much past 20 or 30 miles per hour on it. With that being said, we finally reached the end of that haunted road, which was a four-way stop sign. A part of me thought that maybe the person driving the car took a wrong turn and was annoyed at our speed, a perfectly reasonable explanation, I surmised. My friend was driving, and I instructed him to take a left at the intersection, since I knew these roads very well, and it would take us right back to town. Then the car behind us followed, still tailgating. At this point, the four of us were starting to get uneasy, and my friend sped up a little bit, but this car was still riding our bumper the entire way down the hill. When we hit a straightaway, the car pulled up alongside us, a double yellow road, I might add. I immediately noticed 3 people in the car, and all the passengers turned and gave us an extremely menacing glare. Now, this wasn't a matter of some pissed-off bunch of people trying to give us a piece of their mind. There was something very unsettling about these men, especially because they stayed alongside of us for the entire straightaway before rocketing past us. Bad idea. At this point, my instinct was to call our town's resident state trooper's office, since we lived in such a small community with no local police department. Since they were now ahead of us, I could give a pretty accurate description of the vehicle and the plate number to the dispatcher. He advised us to head towards the center of town, towards the state police barracks. We got to the end of the road, which led into another 4-way intersection. Keep in mind, the strange car was still in front of us, and as they began to go straight, we turned left. For a split second, I thought the incident was over and done with. That was until the car stopped, back up through the intersection, and began to pursue us once again. My then girlfriend and our other friend were thoroughly freaked out at this point. My friend who was driving and I tried to keep our cool, since I was still on the line with the state trooper and he was, well, driving. Although we were both starting to get noticeably uneasy. The trooper I was speaking to told us to try and hurry to the center of town. We were about 5 minutes away when the car sped up for the second time to get alongside us, again, over a double yellow. They gave us that same vicious glare again, but this time they throttled down and got behind us. Finally, we reached our last turn, which would take us straight through town. The roads were pretty much empty, since it was a small town, and nobody was out much past 11 p.m., and these guys were on our bumper all the way down. Finally, our 2 cars passed the gas station, and 2 patrol cars came rocketing out of the driveway, lights and sirens blaring. It was the most perfect trap I'd ever seen. The creepy car immediately pulls over, and is boxed in by the 2 Crown Vics. I could have sworn I saw one of the cops hop out with his pistol drawn as we drove away. About 20 minutes later, the dispatcher called us again and asked if we could meet with the 2 troopers who made the stop so that we could give our statements. We ended up meeting at the town's Dunkin' Donuts parking lot, typical. The troopers that showed up were really cool about everything and told us that the guys in the car were in the next state over. We lived about 10 minutes from the border, and they didn't have any reasonable suspicions to search their car, but they put the fear of God into them. The troopers assured us that they were probably way too scared to ever set foot in our town again, and they wouldn't give us any more problems at the end of the ordeal. My friends and the troopers all had a good laugh about the whole thing, and they thanked us for making their night shift a little more exciting. And that's where my story ends. We certainly ended up getting that scare we were originally looking for, but certainly not in the way we expected.